South Korea's President Yoon vowing to fight to the very end, defying growing calls for him to stand down. Opposition lawmakers have passed a second impeachment bill against him, but the embattled leader choosing to stand his ground, defending his decision last week to impose martial law.
결국 병력이 투입된 시간은 한두 시간 정도에 불과합니다. 만일 국회 기능을 마비시키려 했다면 평일이 아닌 주말을 기해서 계엄을 발동했을 것입니다. 국회 건물에 대한 단전 단수 조치부터 취했을 것이고 방송 송출도 제한했을 것입니다. 그러나 그 어느 것도 하지 않았습니다.
The second vote on impeachment expected to take place this Saturday. The opposition needs at least 9 MPs from the ruling party to vote in favor. Our PPP leader, that's Han Dong-hoon, has joined calls to impeach Mr. Yoon, saying the president is no longer able to fulfill his duties. If passed, the decision moves to the Constitutional Court, which has up to 6 months in which it will then have to make the call on whether to remove President Yoon from office or reinstate him. The walls continue to close in on the president, with the National Assembly passing a new bill. This would allow an independent counsel to investigate him on rebellion charges. However, the bill still requires the president's approval before it can be enforced. Scuffles between protesters broke out near Mr. Yoon's residence. Investigations as well over his imposition last week of martial law, with police launching a second raid attempt on the presidential compound. Another raid on the military's Capital Defense Command was also carried out by prosecutors, targeting soldiers deployed to stop lawmakers entering parliament to vote down that declaration of martial law. And to take a closer look at what's happening in South Korea, CNA's Shin, who has done plenty of reporting on politics in South Korea, joins us in the studio. Grace, President Yoon today speaking in a televised address in which he was very clear, he's standing his ground and restating his original reasons for having to declare martial law. Remind us what those reasons were again and how the response has been to this restatement of his reasons.
Well, Wee-Soo, a few points were made from President Yoon's fourth public address since he imposed an emergency martial law, and that included him explaining that he had abided to the Constitution and legally enacted the military decree, given that the country was actually in a state of crisis. And his evidence was that South Korea had been exposed to North Korean threats, especially since he received intelligence information last year that the National Election Commission, an election body in South Korea, was vulnerable to North Korean hackers. He explained that he had to do a follow-up investigations because at the time, election officials refused to comply to inspect the internal system. But for your background knowledge, the NEC, the National Election Commission in South Korea, has immunity from outside investigation under the Constitution. And since President Yoon enacted the martial law decree on the night of December 3rd, minutes later, we saw special martial law troops go into the NEC, which was what stirred a lot of controversy in the first place. Now, many of the public raised their suspicions that Yoon had taken this action in order to find out about the widespread conspiracy theory that the April general elections were rigged. Now, this is when he ultimately turned into a lame duck after losing most of the majority in the parliament. And the NEC also countered Yoon's speculation today, saying his logic denied the voting system as a whole because it was that voting system that had seated him as a president. And the reaction from the ruling party is also worth noting because, as you mentioned before, the leader Han Dong-hoon criticized Yoon to have actually confessed to treason charges, which he is under criminal investigation for. He also called for an emergency meeting for lawmakers to find ways to expel the president from the party. But that itself also drew criticism within his party against leader Han Dong-hoon, with lawmakers saying that though they are against President Yoon enacting the martial law as a whole, they don't think it was clever for Han Dong-hoon to be associating the president with treason charges so directly.
All right, speaking of Han Dong-hoon, he has stepped up calls for the president to step down, saying he does not think he is able to fulfill his duties as head of state at this moment. And if we look ahead to this likely impeachment vote on Saturday. At this point, of course, this number changes every day. At least 7 members of the ruling party are expected to support this new impeachment motion. We did not have that number on the last weekend.
We did not, and we only need 2 more in order for that impeachment motion to be passed. And right now, the ruling coalition seems to be...
2 more, so at least 9
At least
or
9. At least 9 are needed. And
so 9 wouldn't serve?
9 would have to cross over for this impeachment motion.
Okay, so it's not at least 9. 9 would do it.
Yes, 9 would do it. Now, the ruling coalition is starting to show cracks, as you mentioned, because last Saturday, all but 3 boycotted against the motion as a whole. But with Han Dong-un, as you can see, I want to talk about the fractions within the party. Han Dong-un is losing a lot of followership within his own party, especially after they elected Kwon Song-dong as the new floor party leader, and he's a close aide to President Yoon Suk-yeol. But there's also a growing number of people who are calling for President Yoon to step down, and experts believe it's because that the ruling party doesn't want to repeat the same mistakes that they did back in the 2016 impeachment of Park Geun-hye. It took them a whole administration to come back from this Haenuri party and rebrand themselves as the PPP. So we are seeing a change in what the ruling party seems to be opting for.
All right. Of course, for the people in South Korea, what matters is stability, whoever is in charge. And of course, you've run through this with us on numerous bulletins, how whatever happens on Saturday, we're looking at this going to the Constitutional Court, and you need 6 judges out of 9 to make. Whatever happens then, whoever then is due to take over from President, should he be impeached or should he stand down? What kind of instability are we looking at? What kind of time span?
I think local media has their eyes on instability following impeachment, given that the next in line should be Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, but he's also a subject of criminal investigation, which would then have to hand down the power to the Minister of Education and Finance, and that's Choi Sang-mok, who's also the second deputy prime minister. But now eyes are on whether he was actually involved in the cabinet meeting following up to the martial law decree, which would mean he's also being charged or investigated with treason and insurrection. Then it's just a line of different officials. The next one is the Minister of Education, the Minister of Science. But what's also exacerbating concerns is even if or if not President Yoon steps down or is impeached, who should be the next presidential candidate? And already local posters are looking into candidates such as Cho Guk or Lee Jae-myung or Han Dong-un. But the first 2 from the opposition bloc, they have criminal charges against them. And then Han Dong-un is already losing so much within his own ruling party. So instability is definitely in the air.
All right. And I'm afraid, given that instability, Grace, you're going to be joining us a great deal more in studios over the next few weeks and likely months.